Alaikum. Welcome to Game Changer. I'm Mariam Zia. It's been nearly a week that one of the deadliest earthquakes in the history hit Turkey and Syria. This earthquake is reported to be one of the sixth deadliest natural disasters of the century. So far, the death toll stands at 34,000 and the numbers are only increasing. This earthquake has resulted in a humanitarian crisis that resulted in a number of deaths and affected a lot of people in the areas of Turkey and Syria. In today's show, we will discuss different critical issues relating to this earthquake, and we will also be looking upon the response of international community, how international cooperation can play a role in a unified response, what are the challenges and what are the opportunities for an effective response to this natural disaster. To discuss this and more, I'm joined in the studios by Mr. Hannan Hussain, who is international affairs expert and an analyst. Welcome to the program, Hannan.
Thanks so much.
With him, I'm joined in the studios with Mr. Shahriyar Khan, who is an IR expert and analyst. Welcome to the program. And we are joined online by Dr. Zafar Nawaz Jaspal, who is an international affairs expert and senior analyst. Welcome to the program, sir. So let me start with you, Hannan. When we talk about this natural disaster, we know that so far more than 1 million people are affected and an untold number is still under the rubble. So what is the situation if we talk about this disaster at the moment?
Well, thank you, Mariam, for having me. I think the situation is far more than what a single statistic can convey. You talked about displacements. There are a lot of fears that displacement is going to grow by many a million as well if operations are not carried out right on time. We do see an understanding on Turkey's part that it's now time to move away gradually from the rescue half of the mission towards rehabilitation and sheltering. At the same time, I think it's important to note that the kind of pledges that have been made internationally, we see that the World Bank has pledged 780 million, also drawing upon $1 billion more for Turkey. How closely would the networks through which those funds are brought through and be operationalized, how strong are those going to be? Because we've seen that the kind of assistance brought to Turkey is important, but at the same time, crisis-stricken Syria, which has seen about 12 years of civil war, a lot of the assistance that was guaranteed there fails to get through for logistical reasons and otherwise. So I think all those considerations together will have quite an impact on where we go.
We would be talking more about that later in the program, but Mr. Shahriyar, when we talk about this unfortunate natural disaster that hit both the countries, what is the immediate effect on the communities at the moment?
So Mariam, first of all, thank you for inviting me. And just a few statistics that have recently come out from various UN agencies. According to the World Health Organization, they have estimated that due to this disaster, combined populations of Turkey and Syria that have been affected are over 23 million. And other than that, if we only look at Syria, over 80,000 people have been affected and they're in the hospitals. 900,000 are in urgent need for food and water and other supplies. So the scale of this devastation is like something we haven't seen for a long time. This also kind of like reminds me of the October 8 earthquake 2005 that Pakistan went through, and that was also very devastating. So we have like a lot of similarities, and it's like encouraging to see that the international community has stepped in, especially Pakistan. Even though Pakistan in itself is going through a financial crisis, but it's like going over and beyond to help our brethren in Turkey as well as Syria.
Right. Dr. Jaspal, we are talking about the impacts of this earthquake on Turkey and Syria. So what are the economic impacts and the social impacts of this disaster on both the countries and the communities in particular?
Of course, we don't have a data when we look about economic impact, but what one can anticipate that it will be having a colossal negative impact on the Turkish economy as well as in Syria. Turkish economy was already facing a number of the challenges, and with this, there will be an added, you can say, a problem in that. Second important is, the most challenging factor is societal. The society has been devastated in these cities or in these regions. People are very much shocked. Families have been destroyed. There has been injuries as well as deaths. So definitely people are in a big shock. Of course, the Turkish government and the Syrian government and international community as well, they have been trying to pacify or decrease the repercussion of the earthquake by assisting them economically. But of course, when we look about this societal impact, it will take a time people come out of this societal shock. Because when you see the pictures which have been shared, and at the same time the families, the entire family except one children or one person of the family is alive and remaining as gone. And then the most important thing is the people have lost their hard-earned monies, and that has also societal impact. Then finally, if you see with this earthquake, many people who are still facing, you can say, uh, biggest challenge is how to address their injuries. They're injured.
Extreme weather conditions are there, of course.
Handicapped for their entire life, that will be having a lasting impact. So definitely, we can say it's a natural calamity, but this natural calamity have a immense and long-term repercussion for the region, for Turkey and their neighboring states.
Right, right. So, Mr. Hanan, we are talking about the mental health impacts of this earthquake on the communities residing there. But let's talk about the critical infrastructure, especially when we talk about schools and roads infrastructures that has been damaged in this earthquake. So, what would be the impact? What is being done? And what needs to be done to reconstruct these critical infrastructures?
Right, so let's start with Turkey. I think over there, one of the observations from the Turkish side is that they're going to be building huge swaths of infrastructures, especially the ones that are catering to the residential community, and they'll be setting them up really immediately. So they're going to be operating at breakneck speed, at least that's the motivation from the Turkish side. When we talk about the roads and infrastructure, look, many of the roads which were connecting or leading into Syria, other ones which have been damaged a lot, many of these on the southern parts of Turkey identify as middle as well as middle to low income communities as well. They are pretty much in abundance in certain sectors. So when you look at those considerations, the constraints that those people face, then obviously the signal from the government is that they're going to accelerate the development as it goes through. Of course, that on Turkey's own part would not exactly be possible. You would want international assistance to come through, and I think it speaks a lot to Turkey's credibility. Signals coming from Pakistan as well as world over, that they're going to help with the infrastructure building, and the World Bank estimate is one. And I think when you look at the pace at which this has to be done, it's important to consider Martin Griffiths, who's the UN relief chief, went on record and said that the combined death toll could even be above 50,000. So when you're looking at that kind of a scale, and then this transition away from rescue operations to infrastructure building, the time is less, and that's where I think the international community needs to deliver on its responsibility to get Turkey and Syria up on its feet.
Right, right. International community needs to, play its role and come in. But let's talk about the immediate effects of this earthquake on the communities over there. Like we know that the basic infrastructure is damaged. So what needs to be done for provision of clean, water, food, and basic infrastructure? Because we know that as per, recent estimates, more than 1 million people have been displaced in Turkey alone.
So Mariam, the visuals that are coming out of Turkey and Syria both are heart-wrenching and very devastating. So when it comes to the emergency response, there's like a lot of challenges that are being faced right now from the government of Turkey as well as Syria. And the key challenge is that the road infrastructure that leads to these cities and these 10 provinces that have been affected is severely damaged. Other than that, the freezing temperatures are not like making things easy for anyone. Other than that, initially the response was a bit slow because the families of the first responders, they were also affected, and they were like also worried about that development. And other than that, there's like other devastation in terms of like immediate relief that is needed, temporary hospitals, shelters, tents, to basically keep the people warm. We have to remember that this is a very cold period in that whole region. And to provide people with heating, with blankets, with tents is a huge monumental task. And Hanan is right in saying that the international community has to come back and basically support these people as quickly as possible. And so we can move on from the emergency response
to reconstruction
to
and
reconstruction. Reconstruction is like comes much later, but rehabilitation is like needed.
Of course. Dr. Jaspal, what strategies have been employed by other countries who have faced such natural disasters to deal with these circumstances, like immediate medical help is needed in these areas, rescue and search operations are going on. So what can Turkey and Syria learn from those countries?
I think that generally when we look about the natural calamities, one thing is an established fact: we cannot stop them, but we can decrease the impact or repercussions of natural calamities such as earthquakes, floods, or this kind of thing. We have seen that the Turkey has been following it, and Turkey government has adopted a crisis management very carefully, and in that disaster management department, such kind of departments are there. But of course, when we look about this kind of a mega destruction due to the earthquake, there is no access of the road, there is no access of the light, there is no access of the, you can say, gas. And then, of course, the hospitals, they are destroyed. Certainly, medicines and all these in these cities, in these vicinities are not available. Certainly, there is a need of quick, you can say, disaster management approach in a certain way. If you see the Turkiye government, and especially President Erdogan, made a very clear commitment that what is the planning, how to rebuild the entire situation. And at the same time, international community, and they were reporting that more than 45 countries delegations that these aid packages reached Turkey. Definitely, it's a natural disaster, and collective effort of the Turkish people and the international community will be going to mitigate the repercussions of this disaster. But of course, we cannot expect that overnight you can manage or you can address the challenges which have been posed by the natural disaster or these repercussions or tragedies which we have been debating due to the earthquake.
Right, Mr. Hanan, we are talking about that. What can Turkey and Syria learn from other countries? So, what could be done so that the location of Turkey is at a place that is very prone to earthquakes. There has been frequent earthquakes in the past as well. So, how can they develop, and what needs to be done to develop earthquake-resistant infrastructures there?
Look, Mariam, there's going to be some sort of a constraint attached to that kind of an approach because, when nations respond to emergencies such as the current one, you are going to react to a consequence. So there are limits to how much you can preempt this sort of an understanding. Having said that, I think there's a lot that Turkey could do. For example, it's a coordination with the European Union, which has offered access to satellite imagery to help first responders. Why not use that as part of a broader framework that allows disaster cooperation specifically for earthquakes, now that we know that Turkey has been the subject of quite a lot of frequent earthquakes. So I think on the satellite imagery front, and also to activate like first responses in terms of having recovery funds, not just through appeals, but also based on the understanding that Syria and Turkey may be facing a greater threat of earthquakes. Now, with that sort of a reality on the cards, the message to international institutions, the message to regional powers is that we would need technological expertise, we will need funds that cater to a challenge which does not discriminate between borders. So I think that sort of an understanding can strengthen its case.
What kind of technologies and innovations can be utilized in case of such natural disasters?
So I think first of them would be a very simple one, and not a lot of technological expertise involved there. It's to move the arguments away from a specific flash appeal for earthquakes to a dedicated appeal. So it has to be long-term in its nature. It has to comprise of Turkey and also partners which it feels are vulnerable. And also to strengthen, as I said, a lot of the satellite-oriented and technological expertise which is involved to see, okay, which areas of Turkey could be forecasted to hit, stronger, I'd say, incur stronger damages, and that too during seasons. So I think for that you do have transitions which tell you, okay, during these harsh conditions, these are what we are kind of suspecting, and that coupled with earthquakes could lead to this sort of a soft estimate. So that gives an early signal to all of your suppliers, to all of the proponents for aid, that should an eventuality like that come, this is what we would need, on a lower basis. And I think let's stretch the argument a bit to Syria as well. We've seen that a lot of sanctions, unilateral sanctions, have been put in place. That was a challenge to Syria. I mean, even though a lot of appeal was committed to Syria, none of the UN-based relief efforts could make through in the first 3 days. And that sends you a powerful signal about, okay, you've waived sanctions, but why have them in the first place if the people who are suffering from it are not the regime, in America's own telling, it's going to be the people. So those considerations along with that narrative.
So, Mr. Shehryar, we are talking about, specifically when we talk about situation in Syria, we know that Syria is facing a civil war situation for the past 12 years. What added challenges these conditions pose to the local communities there, and what needs to be done?
So the areas in the northwest of Syria have been hit the hardest when it comes to this earthquake. Other than that, these are also
and
the
those
areas.
have not government control.
Yeah, these are not government controlled. These are controlled by militias. As we know that there's a civil war going on. It's been like over 10 years, and this area is generally controlled by the rebels. So this whole like sanction regime that has been affecting Syria, that has also basically compounded the devastation that has gone on to the people of Syria. The US has rightly asked the UN General Assembly to basically vote on giving more and passing aid to Syria. So that voting is supposed to take place soon. There is only one border crossing right now that goes from Turkey to western side of northern Syria. And Turkey is also coordinating at this time with the Syrian government as well to open 2 more border crossings from Turkey to Syria from the northern side, so aid can swiftly be transferred. So other than that, the airlocks, so there are like no flights allowed over the top of Syrian territory. So I think it's about time that we rise above regional politics at this time, and humanity should basically take precedence over regional politics, especially all the players involved, all the regional stakeholders have to come together and focus on humanity rather than politics.
Of course. So Hanan, these corridors are being opened, but what about the security situation on ground in Syria? When we talk about, would the humanitarian aid assistance, workers would be able to go there and actually help the people in need? What needs to be done for ensure that they are not threatened?
So I think on that end, like security is a huge consideration. So the big stakeholders in Syria's current conflict landscape, as well as preventing it, the United States I think would have a huge role to play in terms of kind of lifting some of the barriers and bringing forward its experience in negotiating within those constraints. We did see that at a time when Syria was undergoing one of its most critical, I'd say, humanitarian catastrophes over the past 12 years, there was a lot of pressure on the US to kind of deliver on those constraints. Now, what would they look like? I think you have to know that when we talk about northwestern Syria, this is a several million stronghold for rebels who've been controlling it. So even if the aid does get through, there is selective access to which partners do get through. We did see that China and reportedly also Pakistan succeeded in kind of sending a lot of it through. But I think even if the UN does not have a lot of clarity on that, and when its chief goes on record and says that we continue to fail the Syrians until this point, then that sends you a powerful signal about the UN having that initiative.
We have failed Syria.
Yeah, so I think on that end, I think if the UN, backed by the US initiative with Syria, comes forward, then we'll see many of the constraints with regard to kind of air logistics and everything be slightly eased, so that people who need this kind of assistance get it. Because remember, assistance is going to be 0% effective if it does not reach the people in need in time. Yeah.
Of course. So there needs to be, there is a lot that could be done, and we need to rise above the political differences and gather together for the humanitarian cause to actually reach these affected people. We are talking about the unfortunate earthquake that hit Turkey and Syria. We have to take a short break. Dr. Jaspal, we are talking about the situation specifically in Syria. So, how does the civil war in Syria affect the scope and scale of this disaster there?
I think that the civil war in Syria definitely is impacting and slowing down the government response to the disaster areas, because the government will be selective in this kind and in this situation, and definitely there would be allegation on the government. And as I pointed out earlier, that these such kind of a disasters, you can say, intensify the cleavages within the society. And if there is a civil war kind of situation, it would be further, you can say, enhanced in its. There would be a more intense hatred between or among.
Magnifies the scale,
Yeah,
yes.
and second point here is that it's not only in Syria, but we cannot ignore in the parts of the Turkey there is a Kurdish dissident groups, and they have been launching some kind of a terrorist activities. But the good news is that I read in the newspapers that those dissident groups are, who have the differences with the Turkish government, Turkiye government, and as well as there, they announced that for the time being there is a ceasefire. They imposed or voluntarily they went for a ceasefire in order to provide or facilitate the government or international community to, you can say, assist the people in this disaster. So in this context, my final point on this is, yes, the civil war is also further going to be intensified after this, because there would be a blame game on the government. Of course, government has its own limitation, as we identified, and my fellow partners also identify that the natural calamities or natural disasters, you cannot stop them.
Of
Mitigate their impact by quick providing assistance, but in certain areas it's too difficult.
Right, right. So, Mr. Hanan, what needs to be done by the Syrian government to facilitate these humanitarian organizations to actually help the people in need?
Well, I think first, common sense first, I think any consensus that is reached and communicated through the UN to the Syrian government needs to be endorsed. So no sorts of like start-stop endorsement there, okay, we would need it, but also there are going to be some sort of, fractured links with a variety of rebels that have been competing for power in its civil war. So I think on that end, I think some sort of flexibility from the international community is also needed. There's some very strong opinions about the Syrian regime, and of course many of them are founded on great facts. But the fact is, it's not about regime right now, it's not about politics right now, it's about the people who've been suffering. And I think that's sort of a discourse. Who likes the regime, who doesn't? Who seconds the government, who doesn't? That's the kind of an argument you don't want to have, because it will only frustrate the hopes of people to get through it. So I think a starting point should be a UN-led consensus backed by the US-led vote on transferring aid and the degree to which that is endorsed by the government. And then we'd have to see what kind of ground does that break in terms of on air logistics, as well as opening up more avenues into Syria, because if one route tends to be frustrated, tends to be captured, has a lot of rebel resistance, it does not necessarily mean you're going to face the same degree of resistance on other fronts. And I think countries such as China, Pakistan would be more forthcoming, because humanitarian assistance being above politics is something that has been part of our discourse and has also been part of the Chinese discourse.
Of course. So, Mr. Shehryar, when we talk about the role of these international organizations, what about organizations that are working for cooperation like OIC? What role can they play in bringing humanitarian assistance to those in need?
So when it comes to the humanitarian response in Syria, the UN aid chief Martin Griffith has rightly said that we have failed the people of northwest Syria. So this basically begs the point and is basically an indicator for OIC and all other member countries from the Middle East and even from the Western Bloc to basically come together and basically start providing aid to North Syria. Other than that, when it comes to the security situation, as we've also discussed previously, even organizations like PKK, which basically have been designated as terrorist organizations by Turkey, the US, and even the European Union, even these organizations have basically called on a ceasefire, and they have basically given a statement that they will not be attacking Turkish military forces as well, as long as the humanitarian support is being provided.
So how have these political tensions between Syria and Turkey affected the humanitarian aid being provided to the people in need?
So one area where Turkey is playing very smartly when it comes to regional dynamics is that Turkey is taking on board regional stakeholders that are involved in the whole Syrian crisis. So there are reports that are emerging that Turkey is also getting on board Russia, which supports the Syrian regime currently, and it wants Russia's nod to open the 2 extra border crossings that are needed to provide humanitarian support. So those negotiations are also like more or less complete. So now there will be 3 border crossings that will be able to provide immediate support through the road infrastructure from south of Turkey to the northwest area where this support is mostly needed. Other than that, this area, which basically is held by some Islamic terrorist group called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. So I personally think that they also need to rise above politics right now, because they have kind of outrightly rejected any support or humanitarian aid from the Syrian government. So they're making it very difficult for even for the Syrian government to provide aid to those areas. So all stakeholders that are involved in this whole situation right now need to rise above politics, as we've discussed earlier.
Mr. Hanan, we're talking specifically about this earthquake, but are there some mechanisms in place already that these 2 governments would be responding in case of a natural disaster? Are there any means of communication and coordination that were already in place and that could be activated or not?
I think many of the trusted ways through which prior earthquakes or other disasters in general were catered to, we are seeing many of them coming to the fore. I think financial assistance has been a very important fixture in past earthquakes and disasters as well, and we haven't seen a lot of reluctance from the international community to go forward. The bigger question is, how do you get them through into delicate terrains where politics and security has been a dominant factor? So one of the reasons why getting aid across, even if you do open up border crossings, one of the reasons why getting aid across to certain parts of Syria was going to be very difficult is because those rebel-held areas cannot receive funds without the authorization of the Syrian government, and that allows organizations such as the WHO to have an independent communication channel with the Bashar al-Assad regime, as we have seen, and then communicate the takeaways to other countries which cannot afford to have direct contact in public light. So I think in that sense, the UN's role is going to be far more pronounced, and I think the World Bank has a lot of mechanisms through which it does cater to this.
Of course. Dr. Jaspal, how both countries can work together to build trust and cooperation in the aftermath of this earthquake?
Both countries have to realize that they have a common responsibility or similar things to fight. For instance, both countries have been facing this natural disaster and the repercussions of this natural disaster and the tragedies their societies have it. Definitely, they both can cooperate in this context, especially when the aid is coming and they are facilitating, because in these border regions, there are many roads which, in these regions, you can easily access from Syrian side or on the vice versa from the Turkiye side. So definitely the cooperation between the 2 governments is very much imperative in this context. Second is that both states have been accusing that they used to support Syrian groups. In this context, they can avoid it. And finally, of course, they have to work together for a long-term disaster management arrangement in this area, because if something happened there, it is going to naturally have impact on the other. So which kind of the court system or the best practices they can share with each other in order to mitigate the repercussions of such kind of disaster or avoid or save the lives of the people. I think there are many areas where...
Right. So Dr. Jaspal, what can international community do to help facilitate cooperation between Turkey and Syria in the aftermath of this earthquake, so that these communities are helped in a proper manner?
I think that first of all, the international community, especially in the West, the people have to realize that, or the governments have to realize that they are not dealing with the Syrian government, which they don't like it, or they are not dealing only with the Turkish government. Erdogan is not among them a popular, but at the same time, they have to realize they are dealing with the people of Syria, they are dealing with the people of Turkey. And they need to support them or their government and facilitate them in this context. Of course, when the international community aid or donations comes, they have to go through the government. And instead of sending their own crews, it's better that they can approach respective governments and share that this is the amount, or this is the thing, or these are the things which we are sharing. And they ask them that which kind of assistance they required, like doctors they needed, like medical facilities they needed, like certain these kind of things. Then the list should come from these governments, and then they send the relevant people who can assist them in this disaster, rather than just thinking, okay, we are sending this team and it is enough, or this NGO is going there. I think that is not going to assist the people of Turkey and Syria.
Right. A lot of funding is being sent to these areas. But when we talk about the global economic crisis, how it has affected the provision of funding for these affected areas?
I think it has. That's a profound question, and I agree with Dr. Jaspal's earlier intakes as well. When you look at the fact that global recession fears kind of loom large over the minds of many economies all around the world, we come to a soft conclusion that there are going to be no easy funds coming for countries in general. So when you talk about disaster relief, I think countries would have to have some sort of a domestic price attached to kind of long-term assistance for that. That's an unfortunate sign, because these catastrophes, they can occur when you have global growth, when you have global slowdowns. So yes, I think from developed economies as well, no matter how much they try to stretch their amounts of funds, it won't be a surprise if they remain limited because of their own domestic, I'd say, growth constraints, as well as the global external pressures that are applying downward pressure on their economies. So yes, we've seen that sort of a trend play out. But when you have large amounts of stakeholders, when you have large amount of countries committing aid, committing financial expertise, then the end pool can be something that is justifiable. So it's important to note that each country participates when you tend to get those funds through, even during a recession.
Right. So, Mr. Shehryar, what's your take on this? That how this global economic crisis has impacted the provision of aid for Turkey and Syria?
So we just recently moved out of the COVID era, and as soon as we basically moved away from COVID, there was the Russia-Ukraine crisis that has hit us, and the global fuel prices, global inflation is rising, and the cost of living is increasing in South Asia as well as all areas of Europe, even the US. International financial institutions are tightening. The monetary controls are also tightening at the same time. And we have to remember that even this earthquake is happening, or it occurred at a very critical time in Turkey as well. Turkey is set to go into parliamentary and presidential elections in June. So other than that, Turkey is also going through an upward inflationary crisis. And
but these are the challenges, Mr. Shehryar. What needs to be done by the international community to actually help these people?
So obviously, first of all, humanitarian aid is already coming from various countries. Turkey in itself has a good liquidity when it comes to supporting their own people. So we'll have to basically look forward when it comes to the reconstruction phase. So one area where Turkey is already taking the lead is that they have already basically committed that they would pay the rent of all the people who have been suffering through these quakes. So for 1 year. Other than that, the credit related financial obligations of these people, they will also be lessened. So the State Bank of Turkey will be playing a crucial role in giving financial relief to the people who have been affected in these areas.
Right.
Other than that, obviously the international community needs to come forward and basically support Turkey in any way possible.
Right. We are talking about the unfortunate earthquake that hit Turkey and Syria and the critical issues surrounding Welcome back. We are talking about the unfortunate earthquake that hit Turkey and Syria and the role of international cooperation for humanitarian assistance in these areas. Dr. Jaspal, what steps can be taken to ensure that the aid and assistance continue to flow to Turkey and Syria? Because at the moment we are at rescue and relief stage, but what is important is the rehabilitation, rebuilding of these areas.
I think that it was very much identified that there is a short-term planning and there is a need for long-term planning. In the short-term planning, Of course, enough has been done. And in this context, despite this, the international community is in a humanitarian fatigue or in a aid fatigue, which was pointed earlier, that because of the COVID and these kind of the things, but at the same time, or an economic recession. But if we see the volume of the assistance which has been reaching the Turkey and the Syria, that seems that in the short term they will be managed. In the short term, let's say what will be needed, that immediate food supply, there's a need for medicines or these kind of activities. But of course, for the long term, it's a big challenge. The government of Turkey, I was hearing this speech of the President Erdogan. He promised that all the houses will be built. And in that context, of course, announcement is one thing, and building the major cities again, the big cities, it's a entire infrastructure from scratch. It's too difficult. Definitely, they need a long-term assistance in this context, and international community collectively can bail out the Turkey and Syria. Of course, the main burden would be remain on them. And as you know, when the economic crisis or these disasters, earlier it seems that they happen in one area, but they affect or undermine the entire government infrastructure's working capacity and the economic capacity of the state, and it will be having a long-term consequences or repercussions. That's why the states are always having a short-term and long-term. In the long term, they need the road infrastructure, the pipeline infrastructure, the gas pipeline, water infrastructure, the school rebuild. Of course, they start in the short term, the schools in the sense of these kind of things, but of course, their infrastructure, and of course, they need a psychological or therapy centers, because the youngsters or the oldies who have been suffered from this, it will take time for them to come out of this trauma.
Right, it will take time and a lot of financial resources as well. But as we were talking earlier about the global economic crisis, how it will impact the effectiveness of the aid being sent to Turkey and Syria, and what can be done to mitigate these effects?
I think that in this context, of course, there's a lesser trust on the Syrian government because of the Western have a different views about the Syrian government. But there is also a trust on the Turkey government. But we have to not forget, when the disasters comes, the commitments started. That commitments are based on or because of the humanitarian, but later on the politics started working. I think that the international community or the donors agencies, they need to trust the governments of both states, and they have to supply them and trust on them, because at the ground these governments can perform and these governments can lead the nation or build all these kind of things. So I think that the channel could be from the international agencies or the donor agencies, from the governments going towards the local bodies within those states, so that there will be an infrastructure build up start, or the long-term project will continue.
Right. Mr. Hanan, what role does global financial institutions play or can play in assisting Syria and Turkey in stabilizing their economies and helping them for the relief efforts?
I think international financial institutions, many of them have set up a good example. So, for example, if you look at the World Bank, there's been a very speedy effort to ensure that Turkey's coming infrastructure phase is facilitated by 780 million as well as 1 billion in the works as well. And I think
is that enough?
It's not going to be enough, but I think no single institution can make the claim that they single-handedly can let Turkey out of it. And I think Turkey's understanding is also, when you mean assistance, it means to assist a government prerogative, and the government prerogative, the government initiative, is to kind of see these things through. And I think, according to one Bloomberg estimate, Turkey could be forced to spend 5.5% of its GDP on the crisis. So when you consider that, I think international financial institutions can play a big role in communicating to other institutional actors and saying, okay, to lessen or to kind of tighten their financial considerations towards Turkey. That could be monetary, those could also be fiscal advice and all of that. So to make sure that the country's extraordinary situation with regard to the earthquakes is not exactly used by institutions to say, okay, this is the kind of pressures that Turkey is facing or not. You need to provide a soft buffer and a comfort. And I think if institutions do come through on that end, we could see some sort of consideration that, okay, Turkey is going through an extraordinary crisis, and we need to be a bit more mindful about the challenges that it's facing, expanding its opportunities in the process.
Right. So what steps needs to be taken to ensure that the funding that is coming in for Syria and Turkey is utilized for the reconstruction of damaged infrastructure, buildings and others, so on and so forth?
So there will be a bit of challenge when it comes to northwest Syria. So even if international aid or humanitarian aid reaches after like rising above all the political situations, the reconstruction in that area would still be a challenge, because who will basically take over reconstruction? Who has the capacity? Who has the technical expertise in an area that is like torn by civil war? Given the whole track record for the last 10 years, that would be the biggest challenge that I basically foresee in the future. And I would also want to acknowledge Pakistan's support that has been going to Turkey, even though Pakistan in itself is going through a massive financial crisis. And the support in terms of humanitarian aid, support in terms of manpower that has gone into Turkey to support the people of Turkey, that's very commendable. And another news that I was reading, and I want to point out, the Pakistani American businessman in Washington who basically anonymously donated $30 million to support the relief efforts in Turkey. I would also want to thank him. If he's watching, it's very commendable that people are coming together.
Example to follow for the world. But like you were talking earlier about the constraints or the challenges that would be faced once the aid reaches those areas, how the aid is distributed for the construction or reconstruction of the infrastructure. So what needs to be done to ensure that the communities are actually built by the aid?
So when it comes to, I keep on pointing towards Syria, because of the whole security and political situation that is being faced in that area. So there's some sort of political framework or some understanding that has to be reached from all the various stakeholders that are involved in the crisis over there. And the biggest challenge, as I've previously mentioned, would be reconstruction in those areas. I'm sure there will be a lot of support coming in for Syria. I'm sure Russia and the states that are involved will be providing a lot of support in terms of reconstruction. Again, with Turkey, the world is standing with Turkey, the European Union, the US, all the UN agencies, and Turkey has the capacity to basically come out of this crisis. The only point that I want to make is the people from northern Syria, they will be affected. They're already affected the most. Right now, we don't even have the exact numbers of deaths.
Of course, so numbers have not been updated in the last 3 days.
Just 4,500. Yes, and I personally think, and I agree with all the analysts right now, we will probably, this humanitarian loss will cross 50,000. And as soon as the data starts coming out of northern Syria, we'll see that this devastation is much more than it is now being reported, because we don't have a lot of journalists on ground that can actually tell us what's going on.
Of course.
So yeah, we need a lot of more support.
Dr. Jaspal, we are talking about working with these financial institutions. What challenges could be in working with these financial institutions, the kind of aid or the kind of financial assistance that these financial institutions are going to provide to Turkey and Syria, and what could be done to reduce those challenges, to actually help the communities, because we actually don't have numbers so far.
No, the problem here is that how much these financial institutions have a trust on them. I think that the financial institution, especially when we talk about, they are more coming from these states which are following the Brotherhood system or the World Bank or these kind of things. And these institutions are more influenced by the Western powers. And in this context, Syrian government is lesser attractive for the Western power. And sometimes in the beginning, when the disaster emerges, the governments or the international community commit the aid, but later on they start looking about how to rate on what they go for their political reasoning. Our assistance have a political dimension. In this context, I think that Syria will be facing a big challenge, because the Syrian allies in this context, in the international setting, they are not much in a position to provide a financial assistance, but they have to go on the other side, and that will be a big challenge or question mark. But when we look about Turkiye is a different country. It has a different sort of thing. It is a member of the NATO. It has of course, but the policies of the Erdogan, they are not, a number of times are not well received there. Many times we see that in the West, they try to impose or limit the Erdogan's popularity or something. There are some differences, but at the same time, the financial institutions have a trust over the Turkish institutions. So in this case, the most important thing is how much these governments of both, I mean Turkey and the Syrian, are enjoying the trust among the creditors or lenders. So this is one thing. Second is, of course, we expect and we demand in the beginning, when the disaster takes place, there is a quick, for the short term, of course, the international community is always sensitive and it rush for it, or the institution provide, but the later we have seen that normally after that, the people start forgetting, a new disaster comes and they start focusing on the other side. For instance, in case of Pakistan, we had a worst kind of a disaster last year because of the floods, but if you see
Right,
today,
right. The financial assistance or the aid coming should be sustainable. So, Hanan, we are talking about the financial aid and what role can international community actually play. So, what do you think? How can international community and these financial institutions can do to better prepare Syria and Turkey for future disasters?
So I think first of all would be to make an example out of the current crisis. So many of the commitments that have been made look great on paper. How are they operationalized? That's going to be one thing. I think the other thing is many of these countries have their distinct leverage as well. So we talked a lot about Syria. Many of these stakeholders who've been in touch with power brokers need to reflect some sort of a consensus or a compromise in terms of what their strong political opinions about a certain regime or certain groups are. Those conditions can stay as they are, but in terms of advancing their own commitments, okay, we want to commit 780 million to Turkiye, but if the Turkiye's crisis is inextricably linked to some of the territory within Syria, then obviously you need to compromise a little bit on your security and political leanings towards Syria to kind of reflect that you're serious about it. And I think those are huge questions that need to be posed to big power players as well. I think on Turkey's part and Syria, they can launch an appeal and say that they'd want stronger checks and balances on the commitments made, that these are not forgotten. Early commitment is great, but would we see new conditions come forward on which these commitments are conditioned?
Of course.
That's the kind of a scenario which these countries need to avoid.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Hanan Hussain, IR expert and analyst, for joining in today's show. Thank you very much, Mr. Sharyar Khan, IR expert and analyst, for joining in today's show. Thank you very much, Dr. Zafar Nawaz Jaspal, IR expert and senior analyst, for joining in today's show. In today's show, we talked about the devastating earthquake that hit Turkey and Syria. What needs to be done for helping the people in need? This humanitarian crisis needs a coordinated response from the world community. That's all from Game Changer.